accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey, Green Lantern fans. Thanks for joining us for episode number 146 of the podcast of OA. I'm Myron Rumsey, your co-host, and virtually across from me on a virtual mic spreading hundreds of miles is our good friend Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how is life treating you right now?
Life is good here in the Midwest, Myron. Just started back to work, and it's just been on the go since. Really revving up. I mean, we hit the ground running, and it's probably not going to stop for quite some time. But I'm glad to be back, and my wife's doing well. I don't think I said it on here, but my wife is pregnant. She's 18 weeks. We heard the baby's heartbeat again yesterday with a visit to the doctor, and we go back for another ultrasound on September 5th, and we find out what it is, but I'm not saying a word to anybody what it is. So we're gonna keep that one to ourselves.
It's exciting stuff. It really is.
It is. So she's due in January. January 22nd is the due date, which just so happens to coincide with my birthday, which is the 21st. So happy birthday to me.
So did you know that this episode is your 25th episode? Is
it really?
Yep.
Man, time flies. It doesn't even feel like it's been that long. It really doesn't. I know I've been doing it for quite some time, but as the weeks go on, I never really tick them down. But it's only in hindsight when you start thinking about, like you just mentioned, 25 episodes. It's like, wow, doesn't feel like it, man. It's been great. I love it. I'm loving it. I love doing it.
So this episode, we've got a retro review episode in store for everybody, and we're going to talk about the classic 1963 issue of Green Lantern number 24, and then that was my pick, and then you chose 1990s Green Lantern number 1 from the relaunch.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Gerard Jones era, so I thought it'd be a good place to throw that in there, because that was, I guess, the time before when they had a lot of Lantern titles that you could choose from to read. And we haven't had that in quite some time since Blackest Night and the era after that. So I don't know, thought I'd reflect back upon a time when we had different issues to choose from, and a lot of different characters too.
Yeah, you had at one point, you had 3 and a quarter books, because you had Green Lantern Mosaic, Guy Gardner, and then you had Green Lantern Corps Quarterly.
Yeah, Dark Stars was after that too. That came along too.
Yeah. But, before we start talking comics, there's some other stuff going on in Green Lantern universe that's worth talking about. Most recently, this might be a spoiler for anybody who has not read the most recent issue of Justice League Odyssey, but Darkseid killed Jessica Cruz.
Yeah, I'm not too thrilled about that. And it's funny because one of the persons I follow on Twitter, he DM'd me and he made a comment about it or something like that. And he's like, "Do you care about spoilers?" And I told him, I was like, "No, I don't care. I dropped reading it, like, I don't know, maybe 6-7 issues ago. I got tired of they weren't really writing Jessica Cruz very well. And you and I have mentioned that many, many times before. And I feel like they lost pace with what she was as a character, and who she was as a character during the Green Lantern's run. And so I just kind of dropped the title. And so anyway, he told me on this direct message. So I was like, all right, well, I got to go read it. Well, no, I didn't even read the whole thing. I just flipped through it, and I just got to the scene where Darkseid did what he did. But I will say I'm not happy with the whole decision that Dan Abnett decided to make. But I will say that she didn't give up in the end, and my hat's off to her. I'm sure she's going to be back. Matter of fact, somebody mentioned that in solicitation she's supposed to be coming back, but I don't know where, and I don't know what title she's going to show up in, though.
Yeah, I think she's included in the solicitations for following books of Justice League Odyssey, but I noticed in the November solicitations, there was no Justice League Odyssey solicited. And in October, it didn't say the book was ending. So I don't know exactly what's going on. But yeah, I mean, we've both been reading comics long enough to know that dead isn't dead. And right. I mean, he used the Omega sanction on Batman, and all it did was send him back in time. And I believe, if I understand it correctly, he can revive anybody he has killed with his Omega beams. So she could come back at any given moment. I think it was just done as a dramatic moment to make it elevate Darkseid's return to being full on evil. And, it's one of those stunt things. I mean, she's not going to stick around. I do want to dispel one rumor. And there was a rumor going around that, DC is doing this because they don't want to pay any royalties out to the creators of Jessica Cruz. And somebody brought that up to Ethan Van Sciver, and because he created the original design for Jessica Cruz when she was Power Ring.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They ended up not really using his original design for her first appearance. He ended up not drawing the book, but he co-created the character with Jeff Johns. And he went on YouTube and said that could be nothing furthest from the truth, that they don't get royalties when they create a character that's based on another character. So if they create a new Green Lantern, even though they may have created the character, they don't get royalties per se because it's based on another character. Just like if they create, I think there was a Chinese Superman not long ago. The person who created that character doesn't get anything for creating the character because it's based on an IP that already exists. And he said that Jeff Johns and he did get a nice bonus check when they decided they were going to use Jessica in things like Superhero Girls and so on, but that there are no residual payments and those kind of things. So getting rid of a character on the printed page really has nothing to do with trying to protect DC from having to pay royalties out when a character's used. And it certainly doesn't preclude her from being used in other media where, if that were true, they would still get paid. So, just to dispel that little bit of a rumor. Speaking of the November solicitations, they made a big deal about the end of the first season of the Green Lantern, and whatever happens is so catastrophic that there will be no Green Lantern book in November, and that when Grant Morrison next releases his next tale, it won't even have Green Lantern in the title. And then it was the shocking, after this issue, how could it? So November comes around and the solicitations comes out. And, it's funny, for a month in which there's no Green Lantern book, there's actually 3 Green Lantern books, because you've got the Far Sector graphic novel, not a graphic novel, the not a young adult series, but I can't remember what the name of the imprint is. But the Far Sector book comes out, and then Grant Morrison is doing a 3-issue Green Lantern Black Stars. So it does have Green Lantern in the title, but doing a Green Lantern Black Stars 3-issue mini that fills in the gap between season 1 of the Green Lantern and season 2. So this is like the summer miniseries, I guess. And then there is Dark Multiverse, Tales of the Dark Multiverse, Blackest Night, which is a story by Tim Seeley that's going to talk about Blackest Night taking place in the Dark Multiverse. And in this story, the Black Lanterns win. And this takes place shortly after that. And the only being capable of saving us is Sinestro, who is half Black Lantern, half White Lantern. They call him the Limbo Lantern. And he assembles a ragtag group to help him try to save the universe. So that's all exciting stuff.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. I'm looking forward to the Blackest Night book. I think that's going to be kind of fun to read a different take on what happens in Blackest Night. That was so long ago. And Tim Seeley's a good writer anyway. I like him, and I think he's going to have an interesting approach to it, especially reading about Sinestro, because he hasn't been around much, and it's going to be nice to see him in another book, and going to be nice to see him kind of shine a little bit more. The Far Sector book I'm really looking forward to by TK or NK Jemisin, is it? Jemisin?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm kind of interested to see what that's going to entail. I hope it doesn't stray too far from the Lantern mythos, insofar that it. I hope it's. I don't expect it to tie in. But I also don't want it to be so far off the map that it has really not a lot to do with the Green Lantern take, the ring and the battery. And I don't expect to have all the Guardians to show up in there or whatnot, but I just hope it stays true to some of its form.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it might be interesting. I'm kind of on the fence about that one and the Green Lantern Legacy book, just because I think it's difficult. I think it makes it difficult for people to get involved with Green Lantern through those mediums and then don't find that character in a monthly book, and so then they lose interest, and I certainly don't want to see that happen. But
right.
The other thing was that NECA Toys just released images of a Green Lantern Predator combo pack that's going to be released at New York Comic Con, and boy, does it look pretty amazing. It's the Predator as a Sinestro Corps Lantern member, and then it's a figure that you can swap out heads, so it can be either John or Hal, with some constructs and stuff, and boy, they just look amazing. It's going to be $60 for the set, which is pretty steep, but they're 7-inch tall figures. They look spectacular. From what I understand and what I've read, apparently NECA is going to make it available after the show, where you can buy it apparently online, but then you have to buy not only the Green Lantern Predator set, but there's a Batman/Joker, a Batman with a Joker version of an alien.
I mean, of course. It has to have some kind of Batman something. You know what I mean?
I think what they're doing is it's a kind of a DC and Dark Horse did some books together, and it's funny because Green Lantern wasn't versus Predator, Green Lantern was versus aliens, but it's kind of an ode to those books. So it looks neat. Have you been watching Young Justice Outsiders on DC Universe at all?
I have. It's excellent. I'm actually on episode 21, and I know the latest episode had more of the Green Lanterns in it. Now, prior episodes have shown Guy Gardner, and then they actually showed Hal Jordan in one episode, and he had the gray temples. But it was only a brief showing of them. But I haven't seen the latest episode. I did hear the latest episode have more of them in there.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I was so drawn to the clip that they showed. I had to go and watch the episode, even though I'm further behind than you are. I watched that little bit of it, and it's basically the opening of the episode. Hal and John really don't get to say anything, but it's pretty cool. They make a neat construct together as a team, and it's just cool to see the three of them together. I'm not a big fan with aging Hal in this way, but what are you going to do?
Well, you're not going to do anything. But the series is good. I mean, I don't know. I've gotten into it over there. I mean, I got into it when it was out before, and I really enjoyed it with season 1 and 2. But this one it's been excellent. I mean, the characters are really, really cool, and the animation's excellent. I mean, DC does good with their animation, and I'm really enjoying it. I had a lot of beef with the fact that it's a Young Justice title. So, I mean, Batman has shown up a lot. Wonder Woman has been in there quite a few times, and and then of course you get the Green Lantern Corps in there, and they're only spot sets when they come in there. They're not in there for very long. But I just kind of got agitated because it's like, this is supposed to be Young Justice. They're supposed to be the ones that this is about. And this goes back to my old thing. It's just I'm sick of Batman showing up and everything. I mean, it's like they've got to have Batman in there to add some kind of support and some kind of facet whatsoever to it. And I don't get it. I'm sick of it.
The last thing I want to talk about before we start talking comics is I mentioned in our last episode that I was going to Terrificon in Connecticut, and I did go, and I unfortunately wasn't able to shoot any videos. I was hoping to do some interviews and shoot some videos with interviewing people like Liam Sharp, but we went on Saturday, and boy, it was so packed, and you really couldn't get private time with anybody because there were lines for everyone. I did get the chance to talk to Liam, which was a lot of fun. And he and I are going to be connecting through DC, and we're going to get him on the show, which is, I think, better because we'll have a chance for both of us to ask him questions. And he was really kind of frazzled because he was doing commissions and signings, and he goes, I can hardly put together 3 words and make them coherent at this point. So it'd be better for him anyway. But I had some interesting conversations that I kind of want to share. And one of them was I got a chance to talk to Tom King, who right now is a very divisive individual in the Batman universe, especially after today.
Yeah.
But people have to remember he did an excellent Green Lantern issue of the Dark Side War, which is to me is one of my favorite books of the last 5 years. And I got him to sign that. And I had interviewed him a few years ago in Baltimore before he got the Bat books and before he really exploded on the scene. And boy, what a difference. When I saw him in Baltimore a few years ago, he really didn't have anybody coming up to him to sign anything, because the only things he really had out was the Omega Men, which had been canceled and then uncanceled. And he was just getting ready to launch Sheriff of Babylon. And this time there was a line like around the block. I got in line and I waited about 45 minutes to get a chance to talk to him and get him to sign my book. And then they capped the line and he was going to be back for another 5 hours. It was crazy. But I did get a chance to talk to him for a minute or two. And I had him draw a Green Lantern character on the Green Lantern #1 sketch cover book that came out. And he's not known for being an artist, but what he tries to do is he does stick figures. So he did a stick figure of Hal creating a Batman and saying he's my best friend, and then he wrote sorry and signed it, which was fun. But I told him how much I enjoyed that book. And he basically said, and I think he said it in other interviews, that Hal Jordan is the most fun character for him to write. And I said to him, Grant's only going to be around apparently for another 12 issues. Maybe, you could take over the Green Lantern stuff. And he said, nah, Grant's having too much fun. He's going to be around a while longer. And he winked at me. So whether that really means anything or whether that's just, being polite at a convention, I don't know. But that was interesting. I also got a chance to talk to Keith Champagne. And Keith is a writer and artist. And he did a 3-issue arc back in the Green Lantern Corps during the Jeff Johns era, where he created the Green Lantern Corps. And that was where you had Guy Gardner kind of becoming a Black Ops version of a Green Lantern. And it had Ramey Hall in it and that kind of stuff. He was there, and I talked with him for a few minutes and told him how much I liked that arc. And I had him sign one of those issues for me. And he was telling me that he had some other things with those characters and that plot line to do, but basically DC squashed it. But that somewhere out there's a whole complete miniseries that is drawn and written and everything, waiting to be seen the light of day, which I thought was interesting.
Boy, these guys got some. I tell you what, man. You hear about that kind of stuff, and it's kind of like, oh, man, you wish you could just get your hands on it. I wish you could get to see it. I wish you could get to see the stuff come to completion. I mean, I'm sure comic book industries they got the ebb and flow. And I know that occurs, and you can't change that. But a lot of these guys put a lot of time and effort into material, and they produce this content, and then it just gets squashed like that, and then then that stuff gets packed away in a box, and then you got fans like yourself and me, and you pick up on those little nuggets, and like Keith Champagne telling you, yeah, there's a whole thing I wrote about this and this and this. And you're like, oh my gosh, I want to read that. It's a shame. It's a shame.
And Liam Sharp was a lot of fun, and he gave me a big hug, which I appreciated. And he and I are working on something besides the interview, which I hope will delight fans when it's announced. But let's just say that it's going to be a giveaway. So that'll be fun. And cool. For me, I also got to meet 2 of our Facebook group fans. We have a Facebook group, and we've got about 2,000 people in it, and it's a really nice community. I couldn't be happier with it. And Jason, who is a frequent poster, he posts artwork on pretty much a daily basis. He and I got a chance to meet up in this huge mass of humanity. We actually bumped into each other like within the first 5 minutes of him showing up at the convention, which was funny. And I got a chance to meet him, and I also got to meet Andrew from the Facebook group, and one of several Andrews, but I don't want to give up people's last names. And I got a chance to meet him, and he had bought a copy of Showcase 22 at the show. Wow.
How much did you pay for it? Do you know? Or
I think he said he paid about $1,400.
Yeah, man, that's an investment, but that's a good investment. I can't say if I didn't have the money, I would do the same thing.
I also got a chance to talk to Dan Jurgens. He was there.
I love that man.
But for me, the highlight was an artist by the name of Joe Giella, and I don't know if a lot of people know that name or not. He kind of is being marketed as the oldest living Batman artist right now. He's in his 90s. He's in a wheelchair, but he did the inking on Showcase 22, 23, and 24.
Man, he was born. Oh, he's way up there in age. He was born back in the late 20s, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's in his 90s, and
Yeah.
he also drew the covers to a number of the early issues of Green Lantern. And so I had a chance to talk to him, and to me it was a delight to be able to talk to somebody from that era that's still around that actually worked on the original stuff. And I was wearing a Green Lantern baseball jersey that Warner Brothers did a number of years ago, and he thought it was the greatest thing. He wanted a picture of me in it with him. He was taking the picture. That was the funny thing. But he wanted a picture of the shirt, which was really kind of comical. And he was telling me, he pointed to the Green Lantern logo on the sleeve, and he goes, I created that logo.
No kidding.
Yeah, he goes, I have the original sketch in my office at home. And I said, well, if you ever want to get rid of it. But he was just a delight, and he had a really neat print of one of his early Green Lantern covers that I got signed. So that was cool. I had such a great time. Wonderful show for anybody who's thinking about going to a convention. Great show. I mean, there's so many different guests that were there. There was well over 100 comic book related guests, comic book creators there. It was a really, really fun show. I think the only thing I was disappointed by was, and might be controversial, but Neil Adams. I think I spent maybe $40 getting signatures from all these individuals I've just mentioned to you. And I took an issue of Green Lantern, Green Arrow over for Neil Adams to sign, and he was charging $50 just for his signature.
Wow. That's a little much. I mean, I get it. He's really popular and but that's a little much.
It was interesting because he wasn't even in the artist area. He had his own booth. He was in more as a retailer than he was there as an artist.
That's interesting. I wonder why.
I think because basically he had a huge booth with a bunch of different prints. He was selling a lot of books that you buy them signed. I realize he's very popular and he's a legendary artist, but boy, that's just, I don't know, $50 for one signature. I understand if you've got somebody who thinks you're going to make money off the book, but for your average fan who just wants to have an experience, that was more than the cost of the ticket to the show.
Yeah, and I wonder, I wonder, the thing that bothers me about that is, and I've ran into that a couple times going to Comic-Cons and whatnot, and the thing that bothers me is you got your humble writers and your humble artists that decide not to charge that kind of money to get their prints or to get their signatures. But in effect, I don't know how much they pay these guys to show up at these shows. I don't know what Neil Adams would have gotten paid to come to Terrificon or whatnot. But, I mean, I don't know. To me, as a fan, I can't subject myself to paying that much money when I know for a fact that, I'm sure he's doing well for himself, and I'm sure that he's just doing a service to come to these shows and to show up for his fans and everything like that. But to me, that just seems like you're gouging the fans for even more so than what you should. I mean, that may be a bad way to look at it, but there it is,
Yeah. Well, when I was at Baltimore a couple of years ago, there was a little bit of a controversy he caused because apparently he was going around telling artists how much they should charge for signatures. And of course, he was telling them money that was much lower than his own.
Oh, God. That's kind of arrogant.
Yeah. But it was neat. I got a book signed by Joe Giella that he worked on with Joe Staton, and Joe Staton was there as well. So that was great. But I could take all the stuff I got signed, or I could have spent the same money on one signature.
Nah, you scored with the stuff that you got, and you got some noteworthy stuff. Come on, think about it. Like, Joe Giella. Running into him and Tom King, let alone. Tom King's popular now. He's done great stuff. Mr. Miracle. And he's got that that new series coming out. What's his face? Adam Strange.
Adam Strange, right?
Doing Adam Strange, right? So, and then meeting Liam Sharp. Come on, Liam Sharp. He's like the mecca of all artists right now. Sorry, I know there's a lot of people are going to disagree with that one.
He was just a sweet guy. He was there with his wife, and I just told him how much I loved his art, and he just reached over and gave me a great big hug, which was just, it's that, again, you talk about a humble artist. I had him sign the picture in that one issue where Hal is kissing his ring.
Oh, that's a sweet, 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 sweet photo. I got that on one of my screensavers that comes up in my computer at work.
I've got to find another copy of the issue because I'm going to tear the one out I've got signed and frame it.
Oh, I would. Totally would. Actually, you should get that thing blown up into a giant poster and frame it.
So anyway, there is one other individual I met, and I'll leave that for our bumper between this and the next segment because this individual did a voice recording for me. So I don't want to mention the name because you'll get it as soon as you hear it. But we'll be back in a couple minutes, and we'll start talking about Green Lantern number 24.
All right, sounds good.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
Welcome back. And yes, that was the voice of Phil Lamar.
That was awesome. I love that. I love it.
he was a neat guy too. But anyway, so we're here to talk about Green Lantern number 24 from 1963. And I thought we would talk about this issue because in the most recent issue of the Green Lantern, we see the living sentient planet and we get the planet's name. It's Ugo or Yugo, depends on how you want to pronounce it. And that's a callback to this issue that we're going to talk about right now, Green Lantern number 24. So I thought it was relevant in that regard. So it's interesting to look at these really old Silver Age books because this issue had 35 pages of story in it. So not only did it have one story, it had two different stories in one issue for the low price of 12 cents.
Oh, man, those were the days.
So this issue had, like I said, two stories in it. Both of them are John Broome, Gil Kane collaborations. And the first story is the origin or the debut of the Shark.
Oh, interesting. That's cool.
Oh, and the inker, by the way, was Joe Giella.
George, there it is.
There he is, man.
You're tying it all together.
Got to pull it all together, you know. So this is the origin of the Shark. Is the first story. It's called The Shark That Hunted Human Prey, and you know you always have to look at these old stories with a reminder that things that were done back then, they thought they were writing for little kids, which they were. So these stories are, you know, they have things which don't hold up to a modern, more adult, mature, more well-informed audience. So there are things that are silly. You know, you've got Tom Kalmaku using the holy fish, jumping fish hooks line and those kind of crazy exclamations that you got back then. But you also got some really interesting bits of science thrown in. And in this story, Hal and Tom Kalmaku are going to go meet Carol and Tom's wife Turga for dinner. And on the way, Hal kind of freaks out a little bit and leaves. And what you find out is that a nuclear power facility near Coast City, there is basically a minor accident, nothing major. Although I find it hard to believe that any nuclear accident is something minor, but in this case, it was something minor. And what ends up happening is that a shark swimming in the bay is mutated, and he advances in evolutionary scale until he becomes kind of a shark humanoid who actually evolves past our timeline to thousands of years in the future. So he's this very advanced creature who has some mind control abilities, and he can basically learn things through osmosis or from hearing things or picking up brain waves. And so he's looking for prey, and he doesn't find humanity to be particularly challenging, and he reaches out there and detects Hal, and so he summons Hal to have a battle. And he nearly defeats Hal in the first issue. This is not the Shark at all like you see during the Jeff Johns day. That's very ferocious and animalistic. This guy's almost, he's muscular, but he's thin and he's much more humanoid than the Jeff Johns version of the Shark is. Much more talkative as well. Just a fun story. You know, there's not a whole lot in there that goes on other than Hal beats him at the end and he gets de-evolved back down to a shark and he gets put away in storage. And then at the end, you know, it ends up with Carol holding Hal and hugging him and saying, "Thank gosh you're all right," kind of thing. But the story that drew me to this issue was the next one, which is called The Strange World Named Green Lantern. And this is the story that Grant Morrison kind of mines a little bit for his most recent issue. And what I thought was kind of interesting is, not to put down Alan Moore, but Alan Moore always kind of criticizes people for taking ideas that he has and recycling them. Like, he's mad at DC because of the Watchmen being used, and he's mad at DC because of Jeff Johns using the Blackest Night Prophecy to make an event out of it. And he's mad basically at anybody at this point. But
yeah, he gets mad at a lot.
Oh, yeah. And, he just announced his retirement. But it's interesting that Mogo didn't appear until 20 years after this story. So, he's just as guilty as anybody else is. But in this story, this sentient planet is lonely. He has not been able to find anybody else no other life forms in the universe, because he's kind of slow moving, and he's very lonely, and he detects Hal. And so he forms one of his land masses into the shape of Hal to attract him. And then he's trying to communicate, but Hal can't understand him. He doesn't communicate on a frequency that we can hear him. So he decides to send a couple of yellow rockets at him to get his attention. And of course that works. That gets Hal's attention. He gets down there and he starts seeing, first of all, the water attacks him and these rocks attack him. And then Sinestro shows up, and then Tom shows up. And at one point, Hal shoots a power beam, and it turns out that the planet can communicate on the beam. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but that's how it works. And he explains his actions, and he basically says, I was trying to get your attention. That's why I launched the rockets, to get you to come here, because you didn't listen. And then I was so happy to actually see someone. I wanted to hug you. And that's what the land masses were when they were trying to reach out and crush Hal, as he was actually trying to give him an embrace.
Isn't it? Didn't the planet also name itself Green Lantern?
Yes. Yep. The planet names himself Green Lantern, and there's basically something going on in the inner core of the planet. So Hal rescues the planet by pulling this inner firestorm out of the center of the core of the planet, takes it into space, and it cools down and becomes a satellite, a moon for the planet. So the planet is so happy that he basically, is like, oh, I'm never going to be alone again. And it's neat. Near the end, the planet says to Hal, "Don't forget, Green Lantern, you have promised one of these days to return and visit me." And Hal says, "I will, Green Lantern, but for now I must be on my way." And now, X number of years later, there you go.
There you go. And Grant Morrison was kind enough to have that poor lonely planet visited by Hal Jordan once again.
Yeah, and what was cool is that the way Liam Sharp drew it is obviously more modern than how Gil Kane drew it, but the landmass stays the same. It just is a very modern version of the same thing. They left it the same. But I thought it was really kind of cool that he mined this piece of history, which, gosh, I'd forgotten all about that.
Sure. And
it made me want to go back and reread it.
1963. Come on. I mean, you're talking about pulling stuff way out of the past,
Yeah, it was a fun issue. Like a lot of these Silver Age books are. They're just fun to read, but the creativity that's in it is always interesting. And Julie Schwartz, as the editor, would always find things in the story that they could put little science lessons in, or something about how sound works or how light works and those kind of things. And so it made it more than just a comic book adventure. You kind of learn something at the same time.
Well, and I think a lot of it had to do with the reflection of the age that these were written in. I mean, you're talking about 50s, 60s comics, and the height of the, you're talking about the height of the Cold War. So a lot of that science talk was big narrative back then. Teaching the kids, about. I mean, even the shark being formed by the nuclear blast. I mean, that kind of reflects a little bit of Godzilla type of creation, and it's. I don't know. DC was always good at that when you read those earlier issues. And another thing I think that they were good at is they didn't focus on those big gigantic events that you had to lead up to, because that's what everybody was expecting. They did these short arcs, and they worked for kids, and they worked for readers now. But I think too much pressure is on a lot of these writers to create. Okay, you're going to do such and such issues, but you need to have this lead into this big thing we have going on over here, or you need to have it leading into a big thing that you're going to make later on. You understand? You know, I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah. I agree with you. You know, you look at things like this where you've got two short stories in one book, and granted, you have 35 pages of story versus the 20 pages we seem to get now. So you've got 15 more pages to do things in, but you still have two short standalone stories, and the storytelling was such that you didn't have these big arcs. The adventures were half an issue or so, but you had elements that carried over from issue to issue that made it feel like serialized fiction and like these big arcs you'd get today. Basically, it was just little things. I mean, it might be just a one-panel throwaway that basically ties the stories together into this larger narrative so that you feel like you're reading about a fictional universe and not just these individualized stories.
Sure, yeah. That's a classic issue, man. And I really like how you pulled that back from with the Planet, you know, to bring it forward like Grant Morrison did and the recent issues. And that's a really good idea. I mean, that helps a lot of the listeners, you know, kind of solidify where these factual stories are coming from and how Grant Morrison is reutilizing them again.
I think one of the things that I find really interesting about revisiting these old Silver Age stories is that Hal is written a lot differently. You know, back then, Hal was, you know, the people that were test pilots were considered almost the astronaut type, and they were very well educated. You weren't just a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy. So sure. Hal was thinking his way through things, kind of the way you still see Grant Morrison doing it now. You know, it gives me a whole new appreciation for what Morrison is doing with the character.
Yeah, that's what, and these guys were heroes back then. I mean, you know, a lot. You look at your space race. You know, the whole '60s was fueled with trying to get to the moon. And a lot of these guys, like Hal Jordan types, you know, these test pilots and whatnot, were geared towards taking this country in a new direction, you know, with space flight and heading into space. So yeah, it's kind of neat to see these characters shine. And Hal Jordan was your typical type of hero back then, especially with the space flight thing.
Well, you know, and this was 1963, so this is the year that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and it's the year after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, and then, you know, subsequently after that, you know, look what they did with NASA. You know, that's really cool. This is really, really cool. That was really neat, man. I like how you brought that issue back.
And the cool thing is if you have if you subscription to DC Universe, you can read this issue for free.
Oh, really? That's really cool.
So that was our discussion about Green Lantern number 24. Let's take a quick pause and let's jump forward to 1990.
All right, sounds good.
All right. And by the way, Pepsi's better.
I would agree. I still agree with that. And a lot of people do agree with that. I always enjoyed Pepsi.
All right, we'll be right back.
My name is John Mayo.
And I'm Bob Retall.
What is the Weekly Comics Spotlight?
Comics reviews from two fans with 65 years of combined comics reading experience,
who each get and read well over 100 different comics each month from Marvel, DC, and a wide variety of independent publishers.
Reviews that highlight books that may not hit everyone's radar screen since most people don't buy so many different comics each month.
Reviews with honest opinions. We enjoy comics but realize not every issue that we read is a solid gold masterpiece. All in about 30 minutes. So please check out the Weekly Comics Spotlight at www.comicbookpage.com/podcast.
All right, Myron. Well, you did your retro review. Excellent choices, by the way. And I do have to commend you for tying those into the Grant Morrison era that we're currently involved in. So I'm going to take us a step forward all the way up to 1990 and get us involved in the Gerard Jones era of Green Lantern. And of course, this series, Green Lantern number 1, that I'm gonna review here, comes off of the Emerald Dawn. I don't know, were you a fan of Emerald Dawn, or you didn't like it, right?
I didn't care for the fact that they tried to Marvelize them, and you know, the whole DWI thing, and gotcha, I didn't care for that part of it.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're gonna go into the return of Hal Jordan, you know, after Emerald Dawn, and going into the issues that Gerard Jones started writing. And we start off with Green Lantern number 1, which coincidentally was the first issue that we see the awesome looking gray side on the side of his hair, man. That seems to be what we've been talking about that a lot tonight.
And this was after, the Green Lantern book was canceled because they wanted Green Lantern to be a piece of Action Comics Weekly. And so this was the launch after that.
Yeah. And it's kind of the, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this was the launch of the whole, the era when you got Green Lantern Mosaic and all those books sprung out of it. It was really, this was I hate to say a rebirth, but it was essentially a rebirth for the franchise. Despite the horrible things that George Jones has done since. Unfortunately, these books will never be collected in trade, I don't think, because of his crimes. But these were interesting. It's interesting to look at the people that were involved, because Kevin Dooley is the assistant editor at this point, and eventually, as we know from history, he becomes the editor, and it's his Gerard Jones friction that led to this book starting to fail and led to Emerald Twilight.
Sad. How sad. But it's comic book history, and it's part of who we are, and look where we came from because of it. So would you say rebirth? I'll say reconstructed. How's that? It's the reconstruction of the Green Lantern universe. Maybe sounds a little bit better. So we start off with Hal Jordan on Earth, feeling sorry for himself. Seems to be like what Hal Jordan does every once in a while, time and time again. And then I will say that I love the art of Pat Broderick. I think he does a really, really good, really, really cool Hal Jordan. And I also want to add that I think he does a lot what Liam Sharp does by filling in the holes. He does a lot of backgrounds, and he doesn't do a lot of white backgrounds in the panels, which I think adds depth to the artwork itself. One downside to the book, Batman appears in it, unfortunately.
I was gonna say, you were complaining about how much Batman shows up, and he's in this issue.
I know, man. And when you told me we were going to do the retro reviews, and then I was struggling to find what I wanted to do, and I got home today and I was looking through my collections, and I was like, what do I want to pull? And I wanted to pull an actual paper copy. I didn't want to pull the digital copies because they have a lot of those. And I was like, I'll pull this one. I was like, it's a banner issue. It started off a big collection. It started off a lot of different books, even though it, like you said, Jones is controversial. But and then I started flipping my way through it and refamiliarizing myself with it. And immediately thought to myself, oh crap, Batman's in this too. It doesn't matter what decade you go to, Batman's involved in this whole thing, man. Just can't get away from it. But anyway, all in all, it was a cool issue. I like how the soul searching Hal Jordan does, and I don't know if readers are familiar. You don't have a copy there in front of you, do you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and I like the page on when it goes to the title page on Down to Earth. I like the cool shot of Hal Jordan shooting up from the ground.
Yeah, he does a dive off of a cliff, right? without his ring. Without his ring. And then right before he hits, of course, he shoots right back up. And then, he runs into Batman, and he starts talking to Batman. And then, of course, you get the not-so-great-looking version of Guy Gardner thrown in there. I don't know if I'm a big fan of the haircut. Yeah, this is your traditional bowl cut Guy Gardner, and I don't think Pat Broderick necessarily drew him that well. And this is the the JLI version of the Justice League that Hal is there, and I think it's comical that Hal walks in and everybody's like, "Oh, Hal's going to join us. That means we can get rid of Guy." And Guy doesn't want anything to do with it. And this is Guy at his most, I want to say offensive, but his most blustery.
I would say that too, and it's really reflected in his artwork. Broderick really does a good job with his emotions and how he looks and how he expresses himself, more or less. I think it looks cool, but it's a little over dramatized even for Guy Gardner. So after Hal does his soul searching, whatnot, and after he says goodbye to Batman, Hal Jordan decides he wants to take a train, and he's going to take a train hobo style to Hope Springs. Now, I did some research into Hope Springs, and this is the first time that Hope Springs is, I think, mentioned in the comic books, right?
Well, they kind of, and I don't know whether this original story took place with Hope Springs or not, but it's a callback to Green Lantern number 77. It's one of the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil books where there's the miners. I don't know if they referred to it as Hope Springs though at that point. It just was like a mining town.
Else.
Yeah.
Oh, it was called Desolation.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah, it was the town of Desolation. And in the story where it's about the miners are there and it's a mining town run amok, it's kind of a callback to that story, even though it's not the same town. But it's a kind of a callback to that whole thing.
Gotcha. Okay, and then so of course Hal Jordan reaches Hope Springs and he searches out Rose Lewis. Now, are you familiar with Rose Lewis? Because I don't remember anything prior about Rose Lewis myself.
No, this is her first appearance.
Okay. And then, of course, he explains that the last time he saw her, got married and changed her name to Rose Harden. Hal also learns that she's now a widow and a single mother of a Toby Harden. I don't know if there's any kind of tie-ins to that from the future stuff, because you get earlier than that, sometimes I get a little cloudy.
Yeah, I don't think that Toby really amounted to anything at all. And in Gerard Jones tries to make it look like Rose was part of the original miner confrontation back in the day.
Okay, gotcha. So Rose gives Hal a job on the ranch, and of course, typical Hal Jordan style, she falls for his charm. After a few days, I guess, I don't know if this is some kind of, like you said, he's doing a soul searching. And I guess this is coming off the whole Emerald Twilight thing. So it's kind of cool to see Hal Jordan take a step back from the regular core. But it's kind of cool to see Jon Stewart show up. And then, of course, you got Guy Gardner being around. And they try to get him to come back into his regular, the regular core status. So, of course, in the end, Jon Stewart believes in him. So does Guy Gardner. And they convince him to use the ring again. And, of course, they all fly off to Oa. And then they find that it's in ruin. And it leads on to an 8-issue arc that Gerard Jones starts to formulate with the reestablishment of the Green Lantern Corps.
Yeah, this was the days, when they ended the Green Lantern Corps book, the Guardians left. And so Oa's abandoned at this point, and the Guardians are gone, and something is calling John to Oa, and so John goes there, and John, I think, is dealing with the struggle of Cosmic Odyssey, because he's very tormented at this point. And Hal mentions in this issue that John has kind of gone off the grid, and that Guy is the Green Lantern for more than anything else, and Hal's just kind of there. He's kind of stepped away from the role, but he kind of comes back into it a little bit here. And just as Hal is starting to establish this relationship with Rose, Guy shows up and taunts Hal, and they get into this really kind of a neat power ring arm wrestling match.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
And Rose sees it, and Rose wants nothing to do with Hal at that point, even though she's kind of fallen for him already.
Typical Hal Jordan arrogance, man. And Guy Gardner, of course.
And, Rose goes on to become a major character in Mosaic.
Yeah, and then we did a review on that. We did that retro review on that, I think.
If I recall correctly, Hope Springs becomes one of the cities on the Mosaic planet.
Interesting. Now that I did not know. Now that I do. Man, see, you're a plethora of information.
and Pat Broderick draws a shirtless Hal Jordan really well, I think.
I think he does. He looks really buff towards the end there, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
And the gray temples are really, really becoming on him. I know you're not a fan, but I've always enjoyed it.
I think it's interesting too that in the inner monologue in the opening, Hal talks about it's been 15 years since he first got the ring, so it tries to put a timestamp on where this falls,
which is kind of cool. Which is kind of like what you said. It is kind of like a rebirth kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this was a great launch to the book. I don't know if you remember, but back when they did the launch for Green Lantern Mosaic, DC released these plastic power rings with a glow-in-the-dark gem in the center that you could get from your local comic shop.
I did not know that. Man, I wonder if you can find those anymore.
It's you can find them every now and then on eBay. I've got one somewhere that broke. And I think I've got another one lying around somewhere in my pile of stuff that I don't have room to put on display. But it was neat. There was a lot of setup here, but it's interesting because it's a much more introspective Hal. And I think again, you take both of these stories and then you butt it up against the Grant Morrison run, in all three of the, both of these versions of the character line up.
Yeah, I would agree. And even though Jones is controversial in his work, I like his writing. I think he did a good job with Hal Jordan, and I like what followed this series. I like how it led into a lot of other stuff. I mean, you're talking about they focused on Alan Scott at one time. He came in one of the other issues or whatnot, and then of course, like you said, it led into Green Lantern's Corps Quarterly, and then Mosaic shortly after that. And of course, this was the big lead up to issue 50 when the big meltdown by Hal Jordan himself.
Yeah. This was the era too when Gerard Jones was given the luxury of playing with all the toys in the Green Lantern toy chest. And so he had a long range plan for what he was going to do. And then eventually, what happened was that he and Kevin Dooley didn't get along, and it led to poor writing and bad conflicts between the two. And the book suffered for it, and the characters suffered for it. And so what started out as a very promising run ended poorly. It's kind of a sad state of affairs, but yeah, boy, it started out with quite a bang, because this was a big thing back in the day. It was a big launch.
Yeah, and it was a cool issue. I really enjoyed it, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to revisit it. I like the cover. I like how it shows all three of them on there: John Stewart, and Guy Gardner, and of course Hal front and center.
I like the John Stewart's outfit in this one. The way they did that redesign.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Totally agree. Yeah, it was a cool issue. So those people out there, pick it up. It's fun. If you take Batman out of it, it's even better.
and again, we all know we all know what happened with Gerard Jones, and you try to read these books without thinking about that part of it, and you really kind of have to divorce his personal life with his professional work.
I do. I often do it a lot of times with his stuff. I just I understand that people have their faults and stuff like that, and it doesn't. I don't let it get to me to where I let it affect me in a way that it inhibits how I'm reading their style. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You have to separate the artist from the art.
Right.
All right. So, well, we'll be back momentarily. We've got some listener feedback to share with everybody.
All right. Sounds good.
This is Giancarlo Volpe, producer of Green Lantern, the animated series, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
All right, Myron. Well, here we are. I might as well just stay with the theme, and Batman is never going to ever leave my conscience. So we got a listener feedback from, lo and behold, Shadow of Batman from YouTube. And he says, shame to hear that this team probably ending at issue number 24. This team has celebrated the Green Lantern mythology, and especially Hal Jordan, in a way that I don't think I've seen outside of Morrison on characters a la All-Star Superman and his Batman run, and simultaneously adding his own spin on things, like how the book changes genres each issue. I mean, the way Morrison is writing or describing Hal is pretty much everything I love about the character, and the fact he is showing the appreciation he has for Superman and Batman into Hal Jordan, it just puts a smile on my face. And who knows what the future of the Green Lantern books will be, but we can't deny that this was a unique title. I mean, issue 7 alone is Eisner worthy. Okay, well, number one, I'd have to agree with him. I mean, you and I, if we go back to issue number 1 when it first started, I remember you and I being skeptical about, because we were just coming off Venditti, and, Venditti will always hold a special place in my heart because he did really well with the Green Lantern book. But, I mean, fast forward to where we are now, how many issues later, and I'll tell you, Morrison has taken it in a different direction, and he's taken it well, and he's written well, and his stories continue to change and over the course of time. And you and I have always talked about, he's just pulling all this stuff from the past and placing it into to relevant time, and I think he does the book justice, and Shadow of the Batman's right.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a different take on the character, and it's almost kind of what needs to happen before we launch forward. I think Jeff Johns had such an enormous impact on this franchise that when he left, it left a hole, and it was hard for any writer to come in and fill that in. I think you need to have someone like a Morrison come in and try to do something different with the character to kind of cleanse the palate before whatever happens next happens. And of course, none of us know what that is. And I do realize that there are a lot of people that don't like the Morrison run. that find it a little bit hard to follow, or they just don't like the characterization, or some people don't like Liam Sharp's artwork. And I mean, art is in the eye of the beholder, so you can't really argue with somebody who doesn't like it. But I think all in all, this run is going to be looked upon favorably in hindsight, and I think it's just been enjoyable. And it's interesting to see, as somebody who's read multiple incarnations of the characters as they've been launched and relaunched over the years, I find that Morrison has taken bits and pieces of all of them and tried to make it look like they all took place and that none of them are discounted, and that this version of Hal is an amalgam of all of these different variations we've seen over the years.
And I like how he's Shadow says that how each issue has been different, but yet it's all followed the same story arc. But I mean, he's right. I mean, you go from issue 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. I mean, they've all been different issues, and all visually speaking, they've all been different issues. But they've all each delivered equally as far as their art, their representation, and they've gotten better over the course of time. And even I have noticed Sharp's work continue to evolve as these issues keep going on, and continue to add levels of more depth and complexity with each page that I read.
Yeah, I agree. Shadow Batman, thank you so much for the comments. Greatly appreciated. So the next thing we've got is an audio comment. And I just kind of want to reiterate to people, we do have a voicemail line, and you can record up to about a minute of dialogue. So if you want to leave a voicemail for us, it prevents us from having to read your email or your comment over the mic, and gives another voice a chance to talk. If you'd like to give us a voicemail call, the number is 406 Pod of OA, which is 406-763-6362. Like I said, you get about a minute before it'll shut off, and that's not anything we do. It's a Google Voice line, and they have a 1 minute recording limit. So we'd love to hear from you in that way. But we do have a voicemail. Let me play that right now. So just hold on a second, and then we'll play it.
Hey, Myron, it's Brian DuPont, and hey, I was calling because I heard the podcast about going to Terrificon. You guys had asked you maybe if you wanted to do some retro stories, and I was thinking, hey, why not tie in Joe Giella with a retro one and do the showcase numbers 22 to 24? I mean, they're pretty interesting. Some of them are kind of funny, and it's just Silver Age stuff. It's beautiful, You should kind of maybe do something like that. So yeah, that's kind of my suggestion. Phil, I haven't talked to you. Congratulations on being on the show. I know you've been on it for a long time, but I just wanted to formally welcome you to it. All right, guys. See you later.
So that voicemail came from a longtime listener to the show, Brian DuPont. And for those people that were around back in the beginning of the show when Bill Giancoli and I were riffing on Jeff Johns and the emotional spectrum and how there were so many different colors. And so Bill and I were talking about the lesser known Lantern Corps, and we had burnt sienna and seafoam lanterns. And Brian designed a seafoam lantern insignia and sent Bill and I t-shirts with the logo on it. And it was a running gag for a number of episodes, probably for about a year or so. And Brian sent us a gift of those T-shirts, which we opened up live on the show, which was a lot of fun. So I'm glad to hear from Brian. Glad you're still listening. Hope you're doing well, bud. So the last piece of listener feedback we've got. Oh, Brian, by the way, wanted to talk about Showcase 22 through 24 because of Joe Giella. And I agree. I think, the next time we do a retro episode, we should do Showcase 22, 23, and 24. What do you think, Phil?
I'd be happy to do that. Those are classic issues, and that'd be good to go back to revisiting those. I'd do those any day.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last comment we've got is also from YouTube. This is from Kristen Faith, and this was she's responding to the episode that we did where we did an interview. I think it was just I had to do the interview because you weren't available, Phil. It was the interview we did about Ring of Victory.
Right.
And she says, perfect timing. I'd literally just finished listening to the audio drama today when I stumbled across this podcast, a smiley face. All of this is really making me want to get back into the Green Lantern comics and maybe invest in some fan creations of my own one day. So, Kristen, I hope you stick around. I hope you dive into the Green Lantern universe. If you do, welcome to the Corps. We're glad to have you along for the ride. I hope that if you listen to the show, we add something to your fan experience. And if you do by chance, or if anybody who's listening to the show does some kind of fan creation, like a video or something like that, let us know, because I like to promote the fan created content. This is about us enjoying our fandom and doing fun things and sharing them with other people. So if you do anything that's Green Lantern related, please let us know, because we'd love to talk about it and promote it on the website and get it out there for people.
And it's cool to see. Because fan created content sometimes is more popular than the content itself. And a lot of that stuff is real, and people do some really, really ingenious things. Like, I remember back on the podcast when you guys used to do the voiceovers with Guy Gardner and them, and somebody would call in, or you guys would have commentary back and forth between the characters. And creative content is what makes it worthwhile, especially with podcasts, and especially with art, and especially with any kind of designs that you can come up with that's not necessarily has to stay right on point with exactly what Green Lantern is, but even if it's tangentially involved, it's still pretty cool to see.
Yeah, if you go out and you search on YouTube and do some hunting, you'll find a lot of really great fan created trailers and music videos and all those kind of things. And I always find those fun. I'm not as creative as I'd like to be as an individual, and I enjoy the creativity and things that people put into these projects. There's a really great trailer for a Blackest Night movie. There's a great trailer for Green Lantern 2, the Sinestro Corps War, that's been mixed together. In fact, I'll put links to both of those YouTube videos in the show notes, because those are both really cool. But cool. I love that kind of stuff. And you remind me of, we're talking about when Bill and I would have some guests on, and Bill has a brother who's an actor, and he has a studio. And so what we would do is I would write a biography about a character, and then Bill, because he was very creative as a writer, would take my notes and come up with mock interview questions. And then he would send this stuff to his brother out in California to read as the character, and he would come up with a voice for Selak and for Guy Gardner and so on. And he would record his voice pieces, and then he would give the script to me, and he and I would record our questions, and then we would cut them all together. And
that's just awesome. I remember that so well. It was so cool.
I loved it. My favorite was, for the longest time, Bill hated Guy Gardner, could not stand the character. And I thought, boy, wouldn't it be neat if we tried to do an interview and we do the Skype call to Oa, and Guy Gardner answers the call because he's ticked off because he's tired of listening to Bill bust his backside. And the meta in all of that is that, Bill's the brother who's an actor is older than Bill, so Bill's the kid brother, and of course there's always that dynamic between brothers, so he really had a good time, and we had to bleep out pieces of the segment because he really ad-libbed some really funny stuff, but it was great. But it was such a great segment. I love it. I'll have to find out which episode that was, and I'll also include it in the show notes, because that was a lot of fun. And we, unfortunately what happened was time got away from us, and his brother got busier doing projects and didn't have the time to work on stuff. And then, Bill didn't have the time to do the creative stuff either. And unfortunately it got away from us, because I would have loved to have continued to do that. Phil, do you have a brother who's an actor by chance?
Nah, I really don't. No, I was thinking about how cool it would be if you could get Gilbert Godfrey to do the voice of Guy Gardner. That'd really piss Bill off.
But anyway, that wraps up episode number 146. We thank you all for joining us and listening to us kind of geek out over some of our favorite comics from the past and share some Green Lantern conversation. We hope you've enjoyed it, and you'll join us again in a couple weeks when we talk about the next issue of the Green Lantern.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. So until next time, as I like to always tell everybody, please treat each other well, keep your power ring charged, and make every day your brightest day.
We'll see you soon.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The blog of OA and the podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.